There is a fire that does not consume. There is a death that does not end. There is a love that survives both, and it has wings. Inscription found on the wall of First Things, author unknown. In the age before ages, when the world was still learning the shape of itself, the gods did not yet have faces. They were presences. They were weights and textures in the fabric of what existed, a warmth here, a cold pressure there, a trembling in the space between things that might have been called longing, had anyone been old enough to name it. The mountains had not yet decided to stay still. The seas had not yet agreed on a direction. The sky was a conversation between light and dark that had not yet reached any conclusion, and at the edges of all things, where even the gods did not look, the dark was patient. It had always been patient. The dark did not rage. It did not hunger precisely, though it consumed. It was older than hunger, older than the concept of wanting, and it moved the way water moves into cracked stone, slowly, without intention, without malice, and absolutely without mercy. It had a name, eventually. Everything that persisted long enough accumulated a name, the way riverbanks accumulate silt. The gods came to call it the void, though the word was too small, too bounded, too definite a shape for something that was, at its essence, the absence of shape itself. The void did not begin its work suddenly. It never did. It began at the margins, the places where things ended and nothing took their place. A mountain range that crumbled and was not replaced. A river that dried and left behind only a scar in the earth. A god of small rivers who was forgotten by the people who had once sung his name each morning, and who faded, and whose fading left a gap in the world, a gap through which the cold of the void crept like smoke beneath a door. This is how worlds end when they end. Not with a scream, not with a war, not with a last great battle between light and darkness. They end quietly at the margins, in the places no one watches. They end when things that were there are no longer there, and nothing comes to fill the space they left. The gods who remained, those who had not yet faded, those whose names were still spoken, whose essence was still woven into the living world, they felt it. How could they not? They were the world in a way that no mortal would ever quite understand. When a piece of it went dark, they felt it the way a body feels the loss of a finger. Not fatal, not immediately, but wrong. A wrongness that built and built. Thessaly felt it most keenly. She was the goddess of memory, and memory is intimately acquainted with loss. She kept every ending, held them the way a library holds books, carefully in the dark, so they would not be forgotten. She was old in the way that grief is old, which is to say she was so ancient that her age had looped back around to something almost like youth. She had a face like unpolished silver, hair the color of ash after a fire has gone completely cold, and eyes that held entire epochs in the way tide pools hold the sea. When she walked, the air around her smelled of old parchment and rain on stone, of things preserved and things mourned. It was Thessaly who understood, before any of the others, what the void truly was. Not darkness, not evil, though it did terrible things. The void was asterisk forgetting made physical. It was what happened to the world when the world stopped remembering itself, when the stories ran out, when the names were lost, when the fire in the lantern guttered and no one was there to trim the wick. And it was spreading. Thessaly walked the edges of the world for 100 years before she understood what was needed. She moved through the dying places, the gray margins where the void had already begun its work, and she thought, and she remembered, and she mourned, And at last, after all of that, she understood. The world needed something that death could not claim. Not something asterisk deathless. The gods themselves were deathless, more or less, and they were losing this war without firing a single arrow. Not something that was immune to ending. Something stranger. Something that could die completely asterisk, could give itself to the ending without reservation, could fall into the dark and touch the very bottom of it and then return. Something that carried the memory of fire even through the deepest cold. Something that was its own lantern, its own wick, its own flame. She had no word for what she imagined. She had only the image of it. Something brilliant, something with wings, something that burned with a light that was not destruction but remembrance. She needed someone to make it real. She needed a mortal. The village of Ardenmere sat in a valley that had once been a lake bed, and you could still feel the ghost of water in the air if you paid attention. The stones of the old houses were smooth, and rounded in a way stones only get when a river has been telling them something for a very long time. The soil was dark and extraordinarily fertile, the kind of earth that remembered being a lake floor and was still, in some essential way, living underwater. Things grew there that didn't grow anywhere else. A particular shade of blue moss on the north faces of walls. A flower that bloomed only at night and smelled of cold, fresh water. Willows that had learned to weep not from wind, but from some internal sorrow nobody had ever bothered to explain. Sale was born in Ardenmere in the deep of a winter storm, which the midwife said was significant, and the village elder said was an excellent sign, and his mother said was profoundly inconvenient. His mother was a practical woman with flour-dusted hands and a talent for bread that bordered on the miraculous. His father had been a builder of walls, quiet and reliable and somewhat in love with plumb lines. Neither of them had any gift for seeing the threads. But Sale did. He discovered it when he was 6 years old, sitting at the edge of the old well at the center of the village, trailing his fingers in the water. He was not doing anything in particular. He was simply existing, the way children do, attending to the business of being 6 without any particular agenda. And then, quite suddenly, he could see them. They were everywhere, fine as spider silk, fine as the gap between one heartbeat and the next, fine as the moment just before a word is spoken. Threads. They ran between things, between the baker and her husband, a gold-white cord of something warm, between the old dog sleeping in the sun and the boy who fed him, a thinner thing, amber and worn, between the well and the spring that fed it deep below the earth, a thread that was almost blue, almost silver, too subtle to name. Between the village elder and the grave where her sister slept, something dark and fraying. Between Sale himself and the sky, a thread that went up and up and up and vanished into light he could not look at directly. He sat at the edge of the well for a very long time, watching all of it, understanding nothing and everything simultaneously, until his mother called him in for dinner, and he went, slightly dazed, and said nothing at all, and spent 3 days not quite back in his own body before he figured out how to look and not look at the same time. How to keep the ordinary world primary and the threads secondary, a permanent soft focus at the edges of everything. He never told his parents. He told no one until he was 12, when the village elder found him sitting behind the smithy at dusk, with tears running silently down his face. The elder's name was Merit, and she had the unsettling quality of asking questions only when she already knew the answer. She sat beside him on the cold ground without invitation and waited. The thread between you and the grave is almost gone, Sale said. He hadn't meant to say it. It simply fell out of him, the way true things sometimes do. Merritt was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Yes. It means something." "It means I am letting her go," Merritt said. Not with grief or with grief that had been processed for so long it had become something else, a kind of luminous resignation. "It means I am still here, and she has been elsewhere for 20 years, and the thread between us is wearing thin. That is not a tragedy, child. That is how it is supposed to work." Sale wiped his face with the back of his hand. "But when it breaks, I will remember her differently, not less, differently." Merritt looked at him then, sharp silver eyes in a weathered face. "You have had the sight since you were small." "Yes." "Have you told anyone?" "No." "Good. Come to me tomorrow. There are things you should know." What Merritt taught him, over the 3 years that followed, was this. The threads were not metaphors. They were not symbols or signs or spiritual decorations. They were real. They were the actual connective tissue of the world, the substance that held things in relation to one another, that maintained the integrity of what existed. A world without threads was a world of isolated pieces, every mountain alone, every river a stranger, every soul a sealed room with no door. The sight, the ability to see the threads, and in rare cases to touch them, to weave new connections or strengthen fraying ones, ran in certain bloodlines, dormant most of the time, activated by something that nobody had quite been able to name. Merritt thought it was grief mostly. The capacity to feel loss, to remain present with it rather than turning away. She thought the sight was, at its root, a form of love made perceptible. Sale was extraordinarily gifted. By the time he was 15, he could see threads across distances that Merritt said no one of his age should be capable of. By the time he was 17, he could touch them, could run his fingers along the fine silk of a connection and feel the entire history of it, the warmth or the sorrow, the age of it, whether it was growing or fraying. By the time he was 22, he could weave, could draw together threads that had nearly snapped, could coax warmth back into connections gone cold, could carefully, Merritt always said, "This is surgery, not carpentry repair." He was gentle as a result of all this, gentle and careful and very, very quiet. He had the kind of face that people found easy to talk to, unremarkable features, warm brown skin, dark eyes with something patient in them, the sort of mouth that suggested it had more practice listening than speaking. He moved slowly through rooms. He was good with animals and small children and very old people, all creatures who responded to stillness as to a gift. He was not, at 22, a man given to adventure, which made it all the more disorienting when Thessaly appeared in his kitchen on a Tuesday evening in autumn and sat down across from him at his table, as though she had been invited. He had been eating bread and honey. The bread was good, he had his mother's gift, it turned out, and the honey was from his own hives, dark and rich and smelling of the night-blooming water flowers that grew along the valley's edge. It was a quiet evening, rain against the roof, the fire in the hearth behaving itself. The woman appeared between one blink and the next. She was silver-haired and silver-eyed and wore gray wool that seemed to shift and settle around her the way fog settles over still water. She smelled of old rain and old parchment. She looked at Sale with eyes that held 10,000 years of accumulated knowing, and she said, without preamble. "You are the one I have been looking for." Sale put down his bread. He could see her threads, not the ordinary human threads of connection, not the warm amber and gold of mortal relationships. Hers were vast. They ran off in every direction like the roots of a tree visible above the ground, an implication of deeper, larger, more extensive systems invisible below. And they were all, in some way he could not immediately articulate, the color of ash. "You are a goddess," he said. "Yes. I see your threads." Thessaly tilted her head. Something that might have been curiosity shifted in her ancient face. "Most mortals cannot." "I have the sight." "Yes, that is partly why I am here." She folded her hands on his table, unhurried, the way someone settles in for a story they have been waiting to tell for a long time. "I am Thessaly, goddess of memory and grief, keeper of endings, and the world is dying." He had known, in a way, for some time. He had not had the language for it, not the large-scale, cosmic language, but he had felt it in the threads. In the past 3 years, something had been changing in the quality of the connections he could see. They were not fraying at the individual level, the way Merritt's thread to her sister's grave had frayed. They were fraying at the asterisk foundation, the great deep threads that ran beneath the world itself, the connections between one age and the next, between the gods and the living world, between fire and the things fire kept warm. There was a gray in them that had not been there before, gray and cold and getting larger. "Tell me," he said. So she did. She told him about the void. She told him about the marginal extinctions, the gods fatting, the threads going cold in the deep places of the world. She told him about her 100 years of walking the gray margins and the understanding she had arrived at and what the world needed. "Something that cannot be defeated by ending," she said. "Something that uses death as fuel rather than surrendering to it. Something that burns." "A fire that does not consume," Sale said, half to himself. Thessaly's eyes sharpened. "Yes, precisely that." "Where does such a thing come from?" "From the heart of fire, from the deepest, oldest flame in the world, the fire that Ashar, god of the consuming flame, has kept burning since the world's first day." She paused. "And from something else. Something the fire alone cannot provide, something mortal." Sale looked at her steadily. "Me." "You, or someone like you. Someone who can see the threads well enough to understand what they are making when they make it. Someone who can hold the pattern in their mind while the work is done. Who can weave, in the literal sense, the necessary connections between fire and memory and death and return." She looked at him with those ash-colored eyes. "The creature we are trying to call into being, the one who will carry fire through darkness, who will die and remember and return, it cannot be made by a god alone. It needs something mortal woven into its making. It needs someone who knows, in their own body, in their own bones, what it is to be fragile, what it is to end." "Have you tried before?" "4 times. The grief in her voice was old and enormous. 4 soul weavers before you, none of them reached the heart of fire." Sale sat with this. He thought about the threads, about how they looked lately, about the creeping gray he had been trying not to name. He thought about Ardenmere, about his mother's bread and his hives, and the willows weeping for reasons nobody explained. He thought about Merritt, who was very old now, whose own thread ran dim but steady. He thought about the creature the goddess was describing, a creature made of fire and memory and death and return, a creature that could not be extinguished because it had already been extinguished. He could almost see it, a shape in the future, wreathed in light, wings wide, feathers the color of sunrise and embers, and the moment just before dawn. He could almost see the thread that connected it to the world. Not silver or gold or amber, but every color simultaneously burning. "What is it called?" he asked. Thessaly was quiet for a moment. "It has no name yet. It doesn't exist yet." She met his eyes. "But it will be beautiful." Sale was quiet for a long time. The rain continued against the roof. The fire in the hearth continued its good behavior. From outside came the sound of the village settling into its evening. Then he said, "All right." She gave him 3 days to prepare, which was both more than enough and nowhere near enough. He spent the first day making arrangements, speaking to the neighbor who kept his hives when he traveled, writing a letter to his mother who had moved 3 valleys over to be near her sister. He did not tell either of them where he was going. He told his neighbor he might be gone some time. He told his mother he loved her. He sealed the letter with wax and the imprint of his thumb. The second day he spent with Merit. She was very old now, 83 years, with the translucency of great age, fine skin through which the light seemed to pass rather than reflect. But her eyes were still sharp, still silver, still the eyes of someone who had been attending to the world for longer than most people thought worthwhile. He told her everything. Merit listened without interruption, which was one of her great gifts. When he was done, she was silent for a moment, looking out through the small window of her cottage at the valley, the dark soil, the weeping willows, the thread of the stream that ran through the lowest part of it. "4 before you," she said. "Yes." "Do you know what happened to them?" She didn't say. I didn't ask. He paused. "I think I was afraid of the answer." Merit nodded slowly. "The heart of fire is not a place for the living. I don't mean that in the ordinary sense, not in the sense that it is dangerous, though it surely is. I mean that it is a place of pure element, of unmixed nature. Fire in its essential state, not the fire that cooks or warms or lights. The fire that is asterisk, the fire beneath the fire. Most mortals who approach it are consumed not because the fire attacks them, but because they are made of everything that fire consumes. They are organic, complex, mixed-nature creatures, water and carbon and intention and memory all tangled up together. Fire, in its essential state, wishes to sort all of that out. Thessaly knows this. Yes. And she still sent 4 people before me. She is a goddess of memory, Merit said, not unkindly. She remembers everything. She does not send you to die, Sale. She sends you because she believes you can survive. The question is whether she is right. Sale looked at his hands. He thought about the threads he could see even now, the connection between himself and Merit, warm gold with threads of something deeper running through it, like veins of ore through rock. The thread between himself and his mother's letter, still warm from being written, still carrying the shape of the words. The threads between himself and Ardenmere, fine and complex and known in the way only the things we have grown up among can be known. What makes me different from the others? What the goddess said, you can see the threads. Merit turned from the window to look at him. The others, I know 2 of their names from old accounts. They were powerful weavers, but they saw the threads as a tool, a means to an end. Yushi paused, searching for words in the careful way she always did, spending them like something valuable. You see the threads as the world itself. You understand them not as power, but as relationship. That may matter at the heart of fire. the fire will sort through you. It will separate the elements of what you are. The question is whether the connection between them, the thing that makes sail sail, and not merely a collection of properties, is visible enough, strong enough, to survive the sorting. He sat with this. "Are you afraid?" she asked. "Yes." "Good." She reached across and covered his hands with her own paper light, warm with a warmth that was nearly spent but spent lovingly. "Fear is a thread. Did you know that? I have always thought so. Fear is what connects us to the things we value. You are afraid because this matters to you, because the world matters, because the people in it matter." Her silver eyes held his. "That thread will hold when others fail. I have always believed that." He left her cottage at dusk, when the valley was going purple and gold, and the willows were doing their evening weeping. He stood for a moment at the gate, looking back at the small lit window, the candle glow within, the shadow of the old woman moving past it. He memorized it carefully, the way you memorize things when you are not sure you will see them again. Then he walked home. The third day he spent alone, not preparing anything, not doing anything that could be called useful by any practical measure. He walked the valley from end to end. He sat beside the stream and watched it for an hour. He lay on his back in the field above the village and looked at the sky, which was high and very blue, with clouds moving through it the way feelings move through a mind, not staying, not lingering, present and then absent, and neither state permanent. He watched the threads. He watched the world being held together by what connected it. He watched the vast, intricate, breathing pattern of it, the web of relationship and love and grief and memory that was, he had come to understand, not a feature of the world but its actual substance, not decoration, foundation. The gray was there, at the edges, at the margins, in the deep threads below the ordinary ones. Cold and spreading and patient in the way that only things with no intention are patient. He watched it. He felt the weight of what he was being asked to carry. Then he stood up, brushed the grass from his back, and went home to pack his things. Thessaly met him at the valley's eastern gate at dawn on the fourth day. She was wearing the same gray wool. She had what appeared to be no luggage whatsoever. She had the air of someone for whom practical preparation was a concept she had moved past long ago. She looked at him and said, "You came." "I said I would." 4 others said they would also. But she said it without cruelty, only with precision. Then, with something that was perhaps the beginning of warmth. "But yes, I believed you." She did not tell him everything about the road ahead. She told him what he needed to know in portions as they walked, as if she were feeding him information the way you feed a fire. Carefully, not too much at once, maintaining the burn rather than smothering it. What she told him first was this. The heart of fire was not on any ordinary map. It was not in a direction exactly. It was deep below the world's surface, below even the deep places where miners went, below the roots of the oldest mountains. But it could be reached from the surface through a particular passage. A crack in the world that began at the place of first ash, a high plateau in the eastern range of mountains that bore the scarring of some ancient conflagration so intense it had left the stone glass smooth. It would take them, walking steadily, approximately 40 days. The road passed through places that were, in varying degrees, touched by the void. "You will see it," Thessaly said, "with your sight. The way threads go gray and thin. Do not try to repair them, not yet, not until you have the means to repair them properly." "It will be difficult," he said, "to see damage and not try to fix it." "I know," and she said it with a compassion that surprised him, a flash of it, genuine, beneath the silver-gray calm. "I have been looking at damage for a very long time without being able to repair it. It is a particular kind of suffering. I am sorry I am asking it of you." Sale looked at her. In the early morning light she was very strange, both ancient and ageless, her silver hair catching the dawn the way frost catches it, bright and cold and somehow lovely. He thought about what it would be like to be the keeper of all the world's grief, to hold all its endings, to remember everything that had been lost. He thought about how lonely that must be. "It must be very strange," he said, "to be the goddess who remembers everything that everyone else has forgotten." She looked at him sharply, as if startled. Then, slowly, the silver composure shifted into something softer. "It is," she said. "It is the strangest, loneliest thing I know." She looked ahead down the road. "That is part of why I need to stop the void, not only because of the world, but because every time it swallows something, I am the only one who will remember that it was ever there. And eventually," she paused, "eventually even I will not remember if there is enough of me consumed. And then it will be as if it never existed at all." They walked in silence for a while. The valley of Ardenmere fell behind them, and the road climbed into the eastern hills, and the air turned thinner and cooler, and above them the sky was enormous and very blue. The road was, as Thessaly had warned him, difficult. Not because of physical hardship, though there was plenty of that, mountains to cross, weather to endure, the particular misery of wet boots and insufficient sleep. The physical hardship he could manage. He was accustomed to it. He had always been a walker, had always found the body's discomforts easier to bear than the heart's. The difficulty was the sight. In the places where the void had been, the world looked different. The threads were wrong, not absent, not yet, but discolored, thinned, the warmth gone out of them. A village they passed through on the 18th day had threads that should have been the warm amber of a community that had lived together for generations, and they were instead a pale, milky nothing, as if the color had been diluted past recognition. The people were still there, still moved through their days, still baked bread and mended fences and argued about the placement of the new well. But they did it with a flatness, a disconnection, a sense of going through motions that had ceased to mean anything. He stopped in the center of that village and stood very still and looked at what the void had done, and felt, for the first time, something beyond intellectual understanding. A visceral, gut-level outrage that was very close to grief. Thessaly stopped beside him. "I know," she said softly. "They don't know anything has happened." "No, they don't remember what warmth felt like. You cannot mourn a thing you do not know you have lost." "But they have lost it." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment then. "This is what the void does, not murder, not destruction, erasure. It removes the asterisk quality of things rather than the things themselves. The village remains. The warmth is gone." She looked at him. "Are you all right?" "No." He turned from the village and began walking again. "Let's keep moving." On the 23rd day, they came to the ruins of a temple to a river god whose name Thessaly had kept, but whose existence had been otherwise entirely consumed by the void. The temple walls still stood beautiful carved stone, fluted columns, a frieze along the top that depicted the river in seasons, flooding in spring, slow and green in summer, narrowing to clarity in autumn, dreaming under ice in winter. But the threads that had once connected the temple to the river, to the people who had worshipped there, to the god whose house it had been, those threads were gone. Not fraying, not thinned. Gone, leaving only the ghost of their having been, a kind of structural memory in the stone, a slight warmth when he put his hand on the carved river frieze, as if the stone remembered being touched by believers. He sat in the ruined temple for a long time. "Tell me about the river god," he said. Thessaly sat beside him on the fallen column and told him. His name, his nature, the shape of his devotion, a gentle god, she said, one who had loved the river for its own sake and not for the worship, who had been known to speak quietly to fish and coax floods to gentleness in the years when the spring melt was too fast. She told him about the particular quality of the light on that river in late afternoon, a quality that had been the god's signature, the way some painters have a signature light. She told him the songs that had been sung at the temple, and the festivals, and the smell of the water in different seasons. Sale listened and felt the warmth of it, the remembered warmth pass through the stone beneath his hand. Not much, almost nothing, but there. "He is entirely gone?" he asked. "Yes." "Then who is remembering him through you?" Thessaly was silent for a moment. Then, "That is a better question than you know." "Who is he to you?" She looked at the frieze, the carved river, the carved seasons, the carved motion of water caught in stone. "He was my brother," she said at last, very quietly. "The first of us to go." Sale said nothing. There was nothing to say. He simply sat with her in the ruined temple of her brother's dead faith, and after a while he reached over and put his hand over hers. Carefully, the way he touched everything, with the care of someone who understood that things could break. And she let him. They sat there until the light changed. On the 31st day, they came to a place where an old cartographer had made her home in the cleft of two mountains, in a house built of found stone and patience. Her name was Bresh, and she was very old, and she made maps of places that did not appear on ordinary maps, the deep places, the below places, the geography of the world's interior. She received Thessaly with the particular courtesy one reserves for beings of immense power that one has known for a long time and has strong feelings about. "Again," Bresh said when she saw them at her door, "you have brought another one." "The last," Thessaly said, "I hope." Bresh looked at Sale with eyes that were brown and clouded with cataracts, but still, somehow, saw entirely too much. "Soul Weaver," she said, not a question. "Yes." "Give me your hand." He gave it. She held his palm and looked at the lines in it. He knew enough about cartography and about the sight both to understand she was not reading ordinary fortune, was not looking at lifelines and love lines in the parlor trick sense. She was looking at the map his particular sight made of his hand. The way the connections ran, how deep the gift went, whether the roots of it were strong enough for what was ahead. She looked for a long time. Then she said, which told him nothing. She went inside without inviting them, and they followed anyway. The interior of her house was entirely maps on every wall, maps on the ceiling, maps rolled in cubbies and stacked in corners and pinned to boards. Maps of the ordinary world and maps of the world below it, and maps of things that might have been the spiritual topography of the divine realm, vast and strange and labeled in scripts he did not know. On the central table was a map made, as she had said on bone. A large, flat piece of bone, yellowed with age, covered in fine lines. It took him a moment to identify the material. The broad, flat wing bone of something enormous, something with a wingspan wider than any bird he knew. He thought of the creature Thessaly had described. He thought of the thing not yet made. "You've been waiting for this," he said. Bresh looked at him with something that might have been respect. 40 years, she said, since the last one came through and didn't make it. She sat down at the table and spread her hands over the bone map, not quite touching it. The first 3 died in the approaches, the mountain passes above the first ash plateau. The cold there is not ordinary cold. It is the void's cold, seeping up from below where the crack in the world is. It will find what you fear and make a shape of it. The 4th, she paused. The 4th made it through the cold, but not through Ashar. The god of the consuming flame. He does not want this made. He is the god of fire as destruction, fire that takes and does not return. The idea of a fire that gives back, that cycles, that transforms rather than consumes, it is an affront to him. He has kept the heart of fire closed to Thessaly's purposes for a very long time. She looked at Thessaly. "You did not tell him this part." "I was going to," Thessaly said. "Ashar will kill me," Sale said, not a question. "He will try," Bresh said. "The 4th soul weaver, a woman named Asha, ironically, she was the strongest of the 4. She got past the cold. She got to the gate of fire. And there she met Ashar, and he was..." Bresh paused, searching for the right word. "Thorough." Silence in the map room. "So how do I survive where she didn't?" Sale asked. Asha tried to fight him or bargain with him. Neither worked. Bresh tapped the bone map with one gnarled finger. "There is a way into the heart of fire that does not go through Ashar's gate. A lesser way, a side passage, old as the world and largely forgotten even by Ashar, I believe." She traced a line on the map. "Here, it comes out here." Sale looked at the line. He looked at where it came out. "Inside," he said. "Inside the heart itself." "Yes, past the god, directly to the fire." "And the thing I need, inside the heart of fire. The thing Thessaly says must be there for the making." Bresh and Thessaly exchanged a look. The look of 2 people who have agreed on something and are now facing the moment of disclosure they have been putting off. "Tell him," Bresh said. Thessaly turned to him. She folded her hands. She said, "Ashar has a daughter. She was called Kira, daughter of Ashar, born of the god of the consuming flame, and a mortal woman who had walked too close to the sacred fire centuries ago and been changed by it. Not destroyed, but transfigured, made half divine by proximity. And then lost, years later, to something that was and was not the void. Kira had inherited her father's fire and her mother's mortal understanding. And she was, according to Thessaly, neither fully one thing nor the other, which made her uniquely, agonizingly suited for what was needed. A creature of fire who understood mortality, a being who could burn and also feel. She lived in the heart of fire. She had lived there since childhood, since her mother died and Ashar brought her to him in grief and fury, and a protectiveness that looked from certain angles like love and from others like imprisonment. She had not left in over 2 centuries. "She knows what her father guards," Thessaly said, "and she knows why. She knows the void is spreading. She has been watching it from below. She can feel it in the deep threads, the same way you can feel it from above. She is not her father's creature in the way that he perhaps believes." A pause. "She is waiting, I think. She has been waiting for a long time, though she would not put it that way." Why didn't you tell me this from the beginning? Because the others knew, and knowing made them. Thessaly searched for the word. Strategic. They went to her as an asset, as a means to an end. She is not, she stopped. Tried again. She is not a tool, she is a person. A very particular, very powerful, very lonely person who has lived in a cage of fire for 200 years. If you approach her the way you approach a problem to be solved, she will not help you. Another pause. You need to approach her the way you approach everything else. How is that? Gently, Bresh said from across the table. With attention, with genuine curiosity. She looked at him steadily. With the actual interest of someone who would like to know her. He lay awake that night on a pallet in Bresh's map room, surrounded by the geography of a world he was slowly beginning to understand, was far larger and stranger than it had appeared from the valley of Ardenmere, and he thought about a woman who had lived in fire for 2 centuries. He tried to imagine it. He could not. He tried to see the thread that ran between him and whatever lay ahead, and found it fine as anything he had ever seen, thinner than the narrowest silk thread, barely more than a suggestion of connection. But there, warm, burning very slightly at both ends. He fell asleep watching it. The last 9 days of the road were the hardest. The passes Bresh's map described were real, and they were brutal in the way that only very old, very exposed stone can be brutal. The cold there was not only weather but something older, something mineral and absolute. And Thessaly had been right. In those passes, the void's cold was seeping up from below, and it made a shape of what he feared. On the first night in the passes, he dreamed of Ardenmere gray and still, every thread between its people gone cold, the village present and empty simultaneously, a collection of shells from which the life had been removed without anyone noticing. He woke shaking, in the blue pre-dawn, with the cold of the dream still in him, and sat up and looked at the actual threads in the actual world around him. Thessaly sleeping on the other side of the small fire they had built in the lee of a boulder, her vast ash-colored threads reaching in every direction, still warm despite everything, and breathed, and let the dream pass through him rather than fighting it. On the second night in the passes, he dreamed of Merit dying, which was not fear exactly since it was also inevitable. But the dream was specific and detailed, and showed him the breaking of their thread, and the breaking undid him entirely, and he sat with the undoing without running from it. And when he came back to wakefulness, there were tears on his face, and the cold had not gotten into him the way it had the night before. On the third night, the passes threw nothing at him, which was either because it had run out of material or because he had passed some threshold. He thought it was the latter. He thought the test in those passes was not whether you could avoid fear, but whether you could stay present with it, could feel it without becoming it. He passed through the high cold on the 7th day and came out onto the first ash plateau at dawn. It was extraordinary. It was the most extraordinary thing he had ever seen. The plateau was enormous miles across, high above everything, surrounded by peaks that cut the horizon like teeth. And the stone was, as Bresh had described, glass smooth. The surface of a fire so ancient and so intense that everything had been melted to clarity, to a hard shine, to a surface that reflected the sky like a dark mirror. Walking on it was like walking on something still deciding whether to be solid. And beneath his feet, this was what stopped him completely in the middle of the glassy plateau, with Thessaly walking steadily ahead and the sky enormous overhead. Beneath his feet, through the glass-smooth stone, he could see them. Threads. Not the ordinary threads of mortal connection. Enormous threads. Ancient threads. The actual structural threads of the world's interior. The connections between one fundamental thing and another. Between fire and stone. Between the deep earth and the surface. Between what was below and what was above. They were down there, visible through the transparent stone, running in every direction, and they were. Some of them were going gray. Some of them were going gray and cold and thin, the same as what he had seen in the ordinary world above, but deeper, more fundamental, more frightening in a way he could not quite articulate. As if these were not the threads of particular things, but the threads of asterisk categories asterisk of things. As if the thread going gray below him was not the connection between one fire and one memory, but between the asterisk idea of fire and the asterisk idea of memory asterisk. And if it broke, he made himself look away, made himself breathe, made himself take another step. The crack in the world was on the far side of the plateau, exactly where Bresh had marked it. A thin, dark line in the glass-smooth stone, no wider than his hand, but deep. He could not see the bottom of it, and warm in a way that was not the warmth of sunlight, but the warmth of something absolute and essential below. He stood at the edge of it for a moment. Then he climbed in. The descent was 3 hours of climbing down in the dark, guided by the warmth below, by a heat that increased with every yard of depth, and by the threads he could feel running along the walls, ancient and deep and pulsing with something he could not name precisely but recognized as life. The way you recognize a human voice in a crowd even before you identify the speaker. Thessaly could not follow him. She had told him this at the plateau's edge with a directness that did not quite conceal the fear beneath it. She was a goddess of endings, of memory, of grief and fire. At its essential level was a god of constant change, of matter refusing its fixed form, of pure process. She and Ashar had never gotten along. She would be sense the moment she descended. "Find Kira," she said. "Tell her what we have discussed. Tell her what is needed." She paused. "Tell her," another pause, longer. "Tell her I am sorry it has taken so long." "What does she need to hear from you?" Thessaly looked at him. The silver eyes were complicated. That she was not forgotten, that I was always watching, that the waiting had a purpose. A breath. She may not believe any of it, but tell her. He climbed down into the dark, and the dark was warm, and the warm became heat, and the heat became something he had no word for, not painful, not quite, or not initially. He climbed for 3 hours in a state of such complete attention that afterwards he would recall those hours as a kind of bright emptiness, a suspension of the ordinary self in favor of pure presence, each handhold and foothold demanding all of him. The passage widened at the bottom. He came out into an anteroom of stone, not glass-smooth as the plateau above, but black and hard, volcanic, with the texture of a thing that had been made by pressure rather than burning. The walls were warm to the touch. The light was orange dim, distant, the color of something immense beyond the next passage. He could see the gate. It was literally a gate, a vast arch of stone, worked by hands that were not human, carved with figures he recognized from the oldest visual records of the divine, the premortal symbology of elemental forces. Fire represented as a thing that was simultaneously a flower opening, and a mouth consuming, and a hand releasing. Through the arch, the orange light was brighter, throbbing slightly with the rhythm of something that breathed. but it was closed by a field of fire. Not flames. Fire as pure phenomenon, as pure heat and light made barrier. A wall of the stuff across the arch that would remove anything organic that tried to pass. He could feel, even from 20 feet away, the absolute seriousness of it. He did not approach the gate. He turned left, along the black stone wall, and felt his way along it in the dim orange light, running his fingers along the stone the way he ran them along threads, with attention, with patience, with the willingness to feel rather than simply look. It took him 20 minutes to find what he was looking for. The secondary passage. It was barely a passage at all, more a crack in the volcanic wall, 2 feet wide at most, angled downward. No carvings, no ceremony. The smell of it was immense, the heat more intense than the anteroom. He turned sideways and went in. The passage was perhaps 100 yards long and spent every one of those yards trying to sort him, in the way Merritt had described. The heat worked at the substance of him, identifying its components, making subtle separation pressures between the water in him and the carbon of him and the heat in him and the electrical firing of his thoughts and the older, deeper thing, the sight, the thread sense, the root of what made him what he was. He felt himself being examined by something ancient and without opinion about the outcome. He held himself together by doing what Merritt had taught him, not by force, not by will, but by relationship, by attending to the threads between the parts of himself, by loving the composite, the complex, the mixed-nature mortal creature that he was, not despite its complexity, but because of it. The fire could sort him if it liked. It would find the parts connected. He came out the other side. And stopped. The heart of fire was not what he had expected. He had expected an inferno. He had expected something violent and consuming, something that announced itself with noise and fury, something that overwhelmed the senses and left no room for thought. He had been, in some quiet part of himself, afraid of this. What he found instead was a garden, or something that functioned like a garden, or that a garden would remind you of, though the materials were entirely wrong. The space was vast. He couldn't see the ceiling, which was simply a higher darkness above the light, and the floor was black stone, smooth here, and from it grew structures of pure fire. Pillars and trees and arches and whorls of every color fire could be, and some colors he would not have associated with fire at all, deep blue-violet, clear white, a green that was both burning and somehow suggesting living things, the green of copper flame and the green of first growth simultaneously. The fire structures made no sound. They burned with an absolute, self-contained composure. They were not consuming anything. They were simply burning. In the center of all of it was a pool. Not of water, of fire so ancient and dense it had become, in some way, liquid. It was the color of everything, white gold at the center, shading to amber and orange and crimson, and then to a deep, deep red at the edges that was nearly the color of old roses. It breathed. He had thought the throbbing of the light beyond the gate was a pulse, and so it was. The pool breathed with a slow, enormous rhythm, expanding and contracting slightly, as if whatever was at its heart was alive in the most fundamental sense. And beside it, sitting on the black stone at the pool's edge with her bare feet dangling over the firewater's edge, was a woman. She was looking at him. She had clearly been looking at him since he emerged from the secondary passage. She had clearly known he was there, had known he was coming, had been waiting though whether with curiosity or wariness or something else was not yet apparent. She sat with complete stillness, the way fire sits when there is no wind, without agitation, with a self-containment that was neither cold nor warm but simply absolute. He found he had to assemble this impression in pieces, as you do when you encounter something that surpasses your existing categories. She was beautiful in the way fire is beautiful, not by accident, not by symmetry or conventional measure, but because everything about her was exactly what it needed to be and nothing was wasted. Long dark hair with fire in it, not simply fire-colored, actually lit, fine threads of amber and gold running through it the way veins of ore run through stone, visible but not garish. Eyes the color of the pool's center, white gold, clear, with a depth in them that went down and down. She wore clothing the color of banked coals dashed deep red and russet, simple and without ornament. She was barefoot on the black stone with fire water a few inches from her feet, and appeared to find this entirely unremarkable. She was looking at him with an expression he could not read. He looked back. After a moment she said, in a voice that was low and even, with something underneath it that was not quite vibration but was close, "You're not dead." "Not yet," he said. "The passage sorts most things." "I know." She tilted her head. Something shifted in her expression, minutely, like the adjustment of a flame in a change of air pressure. "You knew about the passage." "A cartographer, Bresh." She looked him over. He had the strange sensation of being both seen and warmed at once, of the seeing being itself a kind of warmth. "You're smaller than I expected." "You expected me." "I expected someone. Thessaly has been sending them periodically, with the patience of someone who believes the right one will eventually appear." A pause, careful. "You are the fifth." "Yes." "You know what happened to the others." "One was told about you specifically, Asha." Something moved in her expression, quick and painful and gone. "She was brave," Kira said. "Braver than anyone who came here alone had a right to be." A pause. "My father was." "Thorough." "Yes." She looked down at the pool for a moment, at the slow breathing of the ancient fire. "He was protecting something. He believed it was the right thing. He still believes that." She looked back up at him. "Who are you?" "Sail, Soul Weaver of Ardenmere." "Soul Weaver." She looked at his hands. He had the impression she was looking at more than his hands, at the threads, perhaps, at the way the sight expressed itself in him. "I can see it," she said. "Like light through fingers, like a lantern in fog." She paused. "It's beautiful." He felt heat that was not from the fire. "May I sit?" he said. She gestured at the black stone beside her. He crossed the garden of fire to the pool's edge and sat, not immediately beside her, leaving a space of perhaps 3 feet, enough that she could choose whether to close it. He looked at the pool. At close range it was extraordinary. He could see the individual threads of fire in it, ancient and immense, the actual substance of the world's first heat, the fire from which all other fire was descended. He could see, running through it, the deep structural threads of the world, the ones he had glimpsed through the glass-smooth stone on the plateau above, but real now, close, visible in their full complexity. He could see, among them, the ones going gray. He felt her watching his face. "You can see the damage," she said. "Yes." I have been watching it for 30 years. Her voice was even, but underneath the evenness was something he recognized. The sound of a person who has been sitting with a great grief and a great silence for a very long time. Every year more of them, every year the gray spreading further. She paused. I told my father. What did he say? That fire doesn't concern itself with what happens in the dark. Silence. The pool breathed. The fire structures burned without sound. He could feel the heat of the place now in a way that was somehow comfortable. It was not the aggressive heat of an ordinary fire, but something more like the warmth of being inside something living, the warmth of core temperature. Thessaly sent me, he said. He was going to say it simply and completely, without strategy, without the approach of someone treating her as an asset. He was going to tell her the truth and see what she did with it. She has been trying to create something. A creature made of fire and memory and death and return, a creature that cannot be defeated by the void because it has already been defeated by everything and come back. She calls it, he paused. She doesn't have a name for it. She has only a picture of it. Something brilliant with wings. Kira was very still. She needs something from the pool, he continued. The oldest fire, the fire beneath the fire before destruction learned to be its nature. And she needs, he looked at his hands. She needs my sight, my threads, something mortal woven into the making of it, some understanding of what it is to be fragile, what it is to be temporary. He looked up and met her eyes. She didn't tell me what she needs from you. She told me to come here and talk to you and listen, and not to treat you as a means to an end. Something in Kira's expression changed. Something careful relaxed. She said that. Yes. Kira stopped, looked at the pool, looked back at him. She has been watching. She said to tell you that you were not forgotten, that she was always watching. He paused. That the waiting had a purpose, and that she is sorry it took so long. He watched the message arrive in her. He watched it the way he watched everything, with the thread sense open, with the full attention of someone who understood that how a person received a thing was often more important than the thing itself. He watched the message move through the centuries of waiting and the silence of the fire garden, and the grief of a woman who had been, in some sense, alone for 200 years. Her eyes went bright. She looked away from him quickly, toward the pool, toward the ancient fire. He gave her the time she needed. When she looked back at him, her expression was composed again, but different. The composure was not armor anymore. It was simply her. Sit with me a while, she said. Tell me about the world above. He stayed in the heart of fire for 17 days before anything of consequence happened, before any of the large things were decided or the necessary conversations held. He stayed because Kira asked him to, or did not ask him to leave, which in the arithmetic of someone who had not had company in 2 centuries amounted to the same thing. And he stayed because he wanted to. Because the heart of fire was extraordinary. And because Kira was extraordinary in the way that genuinely complicated people are extraordinary, in the way that reveals itself slowly, layer by layer, each layer worth the patience it took to arrive at. He told her about the world above. He told her about Ardenmere, the dark soil and the weeping willows and the bread his mother made and the hives he kept and the blue moss that grew on the north-facing walls. He told her about merit, about learning the sight, about the first morning he had seen the threads from the edge of the well and had needed 3 days to come back to himself. He told her about the road here, the gray villages, The ruined temple with its carved river in 4 seasons, the passes with their cold that made a shape of fear. She listened the way people listen when they have been starved of something with complete attention, with the slightly forward lean of someone who cannot get quite close enough to what they are hearing, with occasional questions that were precise and revealing, that indicated the quality of her attention. She asked about the blue moss. She asked about the bread, specifically about the texture of crust, and whether a fire-heated stone was his mother's method or something more elaborate. She asked about the blue night-blooming water flowers and whether they had a scent and what the scent was like. She asked about the thread he had seen between the old dog and the boy who fed him. "What color?" she said. "Amber, warm, old." Like she considered. "Like that!" She nodded toward one of the fire structures, a column of deep amber flame, steadily burning, old and slow. "Exactly like that." She looked at the amber column for a moment. "I have never seen the threads, only the fire." A pause. "But fire has a vocabulary, colors and rhythms and temperatures that mean things. My father taught me to read it." She looked back at him. "I wonder sometimes if we are reading the same things in different languages." "Tell me the language of fire." So she did. Over the 17 days, she taught him the vocabulary she had spent 2 centuries accumulating. The language of fire as her father had taught it, and the language of fire as she had extended it, in the quiet of the heart, in the long years alone with only the pool and the fire structures and the deep threads to attend to. She taught him that white fire was not the hottest emotion, but the most concentrated, the most focused, the most in itself, the fire of perfect understanding. She taught him that the green fire of copper flame was the fire of things that were both dying and alive simultaneously, the fire of transformation at the cellular level. She taught him that the deep blue violet was the fire of grief made light, of loss that had been held so long it had become something radiant. "Your threads are white at the core," she told him, on the 7th day, after studying him in the way she studied everything with a concentrated attention that he was beginning to find both destabilizing and wonderful. "White with gold at the edges, like the pool at first light." "First light," he said. "Does time move down here?" In its own way, the pool, she looked at it. The pool has a rhythm, not day and night exactly, but something analogous. The light shifts. Every cycle is slightly different from the last. She tilted her head. "Like a heartbeat that has been beating so long it's almost stopped varying. Almost." He watched the pool. He was beginning to see the rhythm she was describing, the long, slow breathing of it, the infinitesimal shifts in light and temperature and the quality of the fire. He was beginning, in some way he could not have articulated, to feel it in his own chest. "Are you lonely?" he asked. He had asked it before, in different forms, circling the question the way you circle something very important that you are not yet sure is safe to approach directly. Today it came out straightforwardly. Kira was quiet for a moment. They were sitting at the pool's edge again. They had fallen into the habit of sitting there, the pool between them and the fire structures all around, the vast dark warmth of the heart enclosing them. She had been getting closer to him, by increments, over the 17 days, or he had been getting closer to her, or they had been getting closer to each other in the way 2 things get close when the space between them has become the most interesting place to be. "I have been lonely for a very long time," she said. "Long enough that I had stopped thinking about it. The way you stop thinking about a sound that has been present long enough to become silence. A pause. But in the last, she stopped. In the last 17 days, he said. She looked at him. The white gold eyes, the fire-threaded hair, the stillness that was her essential quality. Yes, she said, in the last 17 days. The thread between them, he had been watching it, he could not help watching it. The sight was always open at some level, had been growing. It had started as that faint warm thing he had seen from Ardenmere, barely a suggestion. Now it was visible, real, the color of something he had not seen in a thread before. The color of the pool's edge, the deep red that was almost the color of old roses, warm in a way that was different from the warmth of ordinary connection. Warmer, more specific. More like fire than like thread. He became aware that he was looking at her, and had been looking at her for longer than was accidental. She was looking back. The space between them was not 3 feet anymore. I should tell you, she said, her voice low, the vibration in it more present than usual, that I have not, that there has been no one here in a very long time, that I am, she paused, searching. I am not practiced at this. Neither am I, he said honestly. You are mortal, she said. You have a world full of. I have Ardenmere, he said. I have the sight, which makes most ordinary relationships, he paused. Complicated. It is difficult to be with people when you can see the quality of what they feel for you, and it is never quite, he stopped. Never quite what, she said. He looked at her. At the white gold eyes, the fire in her hair, the centuries of waiting that lived in her face alongside the absolute aliveness of her, the quality of being on fire that was her most essential characteristic, not destruction, nothing like destruction, but the opposite of stillness, the opposite of gray, the absolutely insistent refusal to be anything less than completely, vibrantly present. Never quite like this, he said. The silence that followed was not empty. Silences between people who are attending to each other are never empty. This one was full of all the things that had been said in 17 days, and all the things that had not been said, full of threadlight and firelight, and the breathing of the ancient pool, and the complete, surprising, overwhelming presence of being in the same space as another person who sees you. She moved, finally, closed the remaining distance between them on the black stone, and leaned her head against his shoulder. She was warm, warmer than any person should be, the warmth of something that ran on fire rather than blood. He felt it everywhere she touched him. He felt the thread between them flare. He did not move. He simply allowed himself to be beside her, to be present, to let the warmth in. After a long moment, he felt her breathe out. After another long moment, he put his arm around her. I need to tell you something, she said, eventually, into the warm dark of the heart. Tell me. I already know what Thessaly needs. I have known for a long time. She paused. I have known since the void began spreading. I have known since the gray began to show in the deep threads. Another pause. I understand what is needed. I understand what the making requires. He waited. He could feel the shape of what was coming the way you feel the approach of weather. Not the specific shape of it, but the quality, the temperature, the pressure change. The fire at the center of the pool, she said. It is mine to give. It is the fire I was born from, the essential fire, the fire before consuming learned to be its nature. I can give it. She paused. But the giving. The giving, he said. The making of the creature Thessaly describes, the creature of death and return, of fire and memory. It cannot be made the way ordinary things are made. It cannot be built from outside. It has to be made from inside the fire. It has to be made by someone who enters the pool. She stopped. Her voice had gone very even, the way voices go when they are controlling something large. By someone who enters the pool and burns. The silence was different now. And returns, he said. And returns, yes. She lifted her head from his shoulder and looked at him. The fire of the pool is not Ashar's fire. It is not consuming fire, but it is fire and fire sorts. It will take whoever enters it completely apart, every element, every thread, every composite quality. And then, if the threads are strong enough, if the pattern is held, if there is enough to remember what shape the self was, it will put them back together, changed, as something that can die and return, as the first of its kind. A pause. As the creature that can carry fire through the void. The phoenix, he said. He did not know where the word came from. It arrived fully formed, as some words do when they have been waiting in the future for the present to catch up to them. Phoenix, she repeated, as if tasting it, as if finding it correct. Yes. He looked at her. He thought about what she was describing entering the ancient pool, being sorted by fire, being unmade and remade, the terrible vulnerability of it, the absolute requirement of the threads. He looked at the pool. He looked at the thread between himself and Kira, burning deep rose at the edges, warm and specific. He looked at her threads. He saw something he had been almost seeing for days, and had been not quite looking at directly, because looking at it directly would make it real. Her threads, the great fire threads of her divine nature, the ones connected to the pool, to the ancient fire, to Ashar and to the nature of fire itself. They ran, enormous and burning in every direction. But alongside them, grown close to them in the past 17 days, new and fine and warm, ordinary threads, human-colored threads, amber and gold and rose, the colors of connection and affection and the specific feeling of one person mattering to another. She had been, for all her centuries, a creature of fire. She had not had human threads. Until now. It's you, he said, very quietly. It has to be you who enters the pool. She met his eyes. The making requires something from both sides, he said. Not just fire, fire and mortality, fire and the knowledge of fragility, the understanding of what it is to end. Thessaly said the creature needs something mortal woven into it. He felt the shape of it assembling, the pattern clarifying the way a very complicated piece of weaving clarifies when you finally understand the structure. She doesn't need me to enter the pool. She needs me to be the mortal element, the memory of what it is to be temporary that you carry in with you. His voice was very careful now. The threads I have given you in these 17 days, the ones that weren't there before. He paused. They're part of the making. Kira's expression was very still, but her eyes were bright. Yes, she said. You knew this when you asked me to stay. I suspected it. A pause. I did not know what it would feel like. Her voice had gone quiet. I did not know it would feel like this. He looked at her. He thought about the fire garden and the pool breathing and the 17 days and the amber thread between the old dog and the boy, and the thread between Merritt and her dead sister, and the thread going up from Sale himself to the sky above Ardenmere, running off into light he could not look at directly. He thought about all of it being woven, and what it was woven into, and that some threads were the price of the weaving. If you enter the pool, he said and stopped. He made himself continue. If you enter the pool and the fire sorts you and the threads if something goes wrong. It won't, she said. You don't know that. No, she agreed. I don't know that. She looked at him steadily. But I know this. I have been here for 200 years, and the fire has never given me a reason to trust it, not really, not the way I am being asked to trust it now. My father's fire is consuming fire. He taught me that fire takes and does not return. Her voice went lower. But the pool is not his fire. The pool is the fire from before taking was invented. It is the original fire, the fire that was before destruction was. And in 17 days, you have shown me something I had almost forgotten was possible. What? He said. She lifted her hand and touched the thread between them with 2 fingers. She could not see it. He knew that. She felt it only as warmth at the contact point. But she found it with perfect accuracy. That things can come back, she said. That warmth, once extinguished, can return. That connection is not consumed by time or loneliness or silence. She paused. That the part of me my mother left me, the mortal part, the part that can feel endings and love things that will end, is not weakness. It is, she searched for the word. He waited. It is exactly the kind of thread the fire will need to follow back. He took her hand. He held it, both of them feeling the thread between them, warm and specific and burning at the edges with the color of something not yet named. I will be here, he said. I will hold the thread. I will not let go. She looked at him. Promise me, she said. I promise you. The fire garden burned around them, white and amber and deep blue-violet, and every color that fire could be when it was not consuming. The pool breathed its ancient rhythm. In the deep threads below them, the gray spread incrementally in the way it always had, patiently, without intention, without knowing that above it, in the heart of the oldest fire in the world, something was being decided. But it was not yet time. There were things still between them, large things, that had not been said. Things that needed saying not because they would change the outcome, but because the outcome without them would be incomplete, would be technically correct and emotionally insufficient, would be the kind of ending that is also an evasion. He knew this because of the threads. He could feel the shape of what was unfinished, the places where connection was forming but had not yet been sealed, the arc of a story still in its middle movement. And Kira knew it too. He thought knew it in her own language, in the vocabulary of fire rather than thread, but arrived at the same understanding. It was she who said, on the 21st day, "Tell me what mortals know that I don't." They were in a part of the fire garden he had not been before, further from the pool, where the fire structures were more elaborate, where they branched and interlaced in patterns that resembled, at certain angles, forests. She had led him here after what had become their morning practice of sitting at the pool's edge and watching the light cycle shift. She moved through the fire garden with the ease of someone entirely at home in it, ducking under a branch of blue-violet fire without thinking, touching a pillar of white flame in passing the way you touch a familiar wall. Mortality, he said, not carefully, not the way he usually spoke, with the caution of someone attending to the weight of words, just directly. Endings, the specific quality of knowing that things are temporary. I know endings, she said. I have watched things end for 2 centuries. Watching is different. He thought about how to say it. When you are mortal, when you live in a body that is visibly running down, when you can feel the years in your joints and your fading eyesight and your slightly slower recovery from illness, the knowledge of ending is not abstract. It is in your body. It is in the way food tastes better when you are hungry, in the way music is beautiful because it ends, in the way love, he paused. Love is inseparable from loss for mortals. From the knowledge that the person will not always be there, that the warmth will not always be there. Every moment of connection carries in it the shadow of the moment when the connection will be broken. He paused. And that doesn't diminish the connection. He looked for the right word. It concentrates it, like light through glass. She was listening in the way she listened, completely, with the stillness of fire that has no reason to move. And grief, he continued. The grief of mortals is different from the grief of gods, I think. Your Thessaly has been grieving for 10,000 years. That is grief that has had time to become something almost geological. But mortal grief is raw. It is immediate. It is the thread between Merit and her sister's grave going thin, and Merit feeling every millimeter of the thinning. It is my mother writing my name in flour on the table when she is worried, which she has done since I was small. It is, he stopped. It is knowing that everything beautiful is borrowed. Kira looked at him for a long time. Do you regret it, she said, being mortal? No, he said, immediately without having to think about it. No, it is, he tried to find the right way to say this. It is the source of everything I value about myself. The sight, the care I take, the way I attend to things. He looked at her. The way I attended to you when I arrived here. I didn't know I was going to want to. I didn't plan it. But I was made by 17 centuries of borrowed time before me and whatever number of years still ahead to pay attention to things that matter, to not take them for granted. He paused. You, he said quietly. I don't take you for granted. The fire trees burned around them, silent and colorful and serene. She stood very close to him. The space between them had become, over 21 days, the kind of space that is less absence than presence, that is charged with awareness of how little it would take to close it entirely. Tell me something you would miss, she said. Her voice was low. If you didn't come back from here, tell me specifically. He thought not of large things, but of small ones, which was, he suspected, the whole point. The smell of bread in the morning, he said. Sitting on the roof when there is lightning in the distance over the eastern mountains. The specific amber color of the thread between old friends. Merit's voice telling me I did something wrong, which has always sounded more like love than criticism. He paused. The night-blooming water flowers. They smell like cold, fresh water and something else, something I've never been able to name. I've been trying to name it for years. Name it now. He thought about it. He thought about lying in the field above Ardenmere, looking at the sky, and the scent rising from the valleys edged the cool water smell of the flowers, yes, and beneath it something else. Something that reminded him of the moment just before a thought arrives fully formed. Something that smelled like possibility, he said, like things that have not yet happened. She was looking at him with an expression he had no name for, an expression that was partly the expression of someone feeling something very large very carefully, and partly the expression of someone who is deciding something, and partly something else, something that was entirely its own. She reached out and touched his face. Her hand was warm, warmer than any hand should be, the warmth of something running on ancient fire. Her fingers curved against his cheekbone with a gentleness that was somehow more than he had expected from something so inherently powerful. "Tell me what that feels like," she said, in the language of threads. He covered her hand with his. He looked at the thread between them, the rose-red thread with fire at its edges, burning brighter than it had been a moment ago. "Like being held and released simultaneously," he said. "Like something that was borrowed becoming yours," like he paused. "Like the moment just before a word is spoken." She leaned forward and kissed him. It was not a long kiss. It was the kind of kiss that is also a declaration, a statement of intent, a crossing of a threshold from one state to another, the closing of the distance that had been exactly one thing for 21 days and was now something else entirely. It was warm, of course it was warm. She was warm. She was made of fire and memory and 2 centuries of waiting, and the warmth of her moved through him with the quality of something that had always belonged there, had always been present in potential, was only now becoming actual. When she pulled back, she was close enough that he could feel her breath, warm and real, and she looked at him with white gold eyes that were bright. "I have been waiting," she said, "for 200 years, and I did not know what I was waiting for." "And now," he said. "Now I know." She looked at him. It was not the freedom, not the end of the silence, not even the making of the phoenix. She paused. "It was this. It was someone who would look at me the way you look at me, as if I am exactly what I am, and that is enough." He held her face between his hands, carefully, the way he held everything with the attention of someone who understood that things could break, and that some things were worth the risk of touching. "You are enough," he said. "You are more than enough. You are the fire and the memory and the return. You are everything the world is missing." His voice was steady. "And when you go into the pool, when you burn and come back, I will be here. I will be holding the thread. I will be the thing you follow back." Chapter 10. To touch the dark. On the 25th day, Ashar came. He came without warning, or with the warning of the fire, which was a change in quality rather than a sound, a shift in the breathing of the pool and the burning of the fire structures, a rise in temperature that was not the steady warmth of the heart, but something sharper, more authoritative, the temperature of someone who is accustomed to being the hottest thing in any room. Sale felt him before he appeared, felt the threads of divine fire suddenly illuminated, vast and consuming and impatient, filling the heart with a presence that was overwhelming in its intensity. Ashar did not look like a man, or rather, he was shaped like a man upright, 2 arms, 2 legs, a face, but the face was fire, not metaphorically, not a symbol, but literally. Looking at him was looking into a fire. He was the height of 2 men and wore something that was either armor or a second skin, burnished black and burning along every edge. His eyes were the white of the hottest fire, the white of something burning so completely it has passed through all the colors and come out the other side. He looked at Sale with those white eyes, and what Sale felt was not fear exactly, though fear was in it. It was the feeling of being seen completely by something that did not share any of your categories. The feeling of being assessed by an intelligence that had no investment in the outcome. "You are the mortal she has been speaking to," Ashar said. His voice was the sound of a fire that has found new fuel. Kira was on her feet between them before Sale had fully registered the movement. She was not aggressive, she was very still, but she was positioned, which said everything that needed saying. "Father," she said, Kira, Ashar's gaze moved to her. Something shifted in it, not softening exactly, but complicating. The god of consuming fire looked at his daughter, and the consuming quality of his gaze became something that had more dimensions in it. I have allowed this long enough. You have allowed nothing, she said evenly. I am not something to be allowed. You are something to be protected. From what? From whom? She kept her voice level. From a mortal who has done nothing but speak honestly and sit beside me for 25 days. Ashar's gaze cut back to Sale. He was sent by Thessaly. Yes. Thessaly wishes to use the pool, wishes to use you. His voice dropped to something that was both quieter and hotter. She would remake you. She would put you in the fire and ask you to burn for her purposes, to unmake yourself for the world's sake, and you, he stopped. The god of consuming fire looked, for a moment, like a father who was afraid. You would let her. You always would have let her. Father. I lost your mother, Ashar said. The words came out stripped of their authority, bare and old. I will not lose you. The silence that followed was enormous. Sale stood still. He could see the threads here, could see the vast, ancient thread between Ashar and Kira, the thread of a father and a child, thousands of years old, running through every color that love and grief and fear and power could produce simultaneously. It was the most complicated thread he had ever seen. It was wounded in the way that threads between people who love each other and do not know how to love each other well are always wounded. Fraying at the edges, too tight at the center, held together by something that was strength and something that was stubbornness and something that was, at the very core, genuine. He did not speak. Kira took a breath. When she spoke again, her voice was different, not harder, not softer, but truer. The voice of someone who has decided to say the real thing instead of the safe thing. I know, she said, that you have been protecting me. I know that is what this has been, the fire gate, the 200 years, the refusal to let Thessaly's people through. I know it has been protection. She paused. But, Father, when something is protected so completely that it cannot grow, cannot change, cannot choose its own risk, is that protection? She looked at him steadily. Or is that fire that does not give back? The god of consuming fire was still for a very long time. The pool will take everything, he said. Yes. There is no guarantee of return. There is never a guarantee. She looked at him. You of all beings know that. You held Mother carefully, you protected her, and she stopped. The void doesn't care about gates, Father. The void doesn't care about the fire you keep at your thresholds. It will come for everything that is not willing to die and return. Her voice was quiet now, direct, unsentimental in the way that things that are deeply felt are often unsentimental when spoken. I am willing. I have been willing for a long time. I needed someone to. She paused. I needed someone to remind me what I was willing asterisk for asterisk. She didn't look at Sale. She didn't need to. Ashar looked at Sale now, and the quality of his gaze was different. Not the assessment of an obstacle, but something more complex. Something that might have been, if gods of consuming fire were capable of it, the slow, unwilling evaluation of a man in whom something worthy might reside. Soul Weaver, he said. Yes. You know what she is asking of herself. I know. And you. Sale met those burning white eyes. He thought about the 4 people before him. He thought about Asha, who had been brave. He thought about the thread between himself and Kira, burning rose-red with fire at the edges. He thought about what it felt like to have that thread in his hands. "I will hold the thread," he said. "I promised her I will not let go." Ishar was silent for a long time. Then, slowly, like a fire that has decided to burn in a new direction, he moved aside. He did not leave. They had expected him to leave, to make his decision and depart, to return to his consuming fire and his terrible lonely grief and his long refusal. Instead, he stayed. He stayed at the edge of the fire garden, at a distance, and watched. He did not speak to Sail again. He spoke to Kira in quiet exchanges that Sail was not privy to and did not try to be. They were father and daughter, working something out between them that had been waiting for working out for 2 centuries, and the working out was not his business. But he saw the thread between them change. He could not help seeing it. The thread that had been too tight at the center began, incrementally, to ease. The fraying at the edges began to be addressed, slowly, imperfectly, in the way that old damage in threads is always addressed, not erased but incorporated, made part of the pattern rather than a flaw in it. On the 3rd day after Ashar's arrival, the god came and sat beside Sail at the edge of the pool. This was alarming in the way that being sat beside by a mountain is alarming. Not threatening exactly, but impossible to ignore. The sheer scale and heat of the presence impossible to pretend was ordinary. Ishar looked at the pool for a long time. Then he said, "She was always going to do this." Sail said nothing. From the moment the gray began in the deep threads, from the moment she understood what it meant, Ashar's voice was different from when he had confronted them, less authority in it, less fire as power, and more fire as something that has been burning alone for too long. She is her mother's daughter in this. Her mother would have he stopped. Her mother could not bear to be the person who stood by while something was wrong and could be made right. It was he paused. It was magnificent and terrible, in equal measure. Sail looked at the thread between Ashar and the place where his wife had been old and thin and cold at one end, the end that went into the void's territory. Not gray, still something recognizable as love, but stretched very, very thin. "I'm sorry," he said. Ashar looked at him. "You are." "Yes, for the loss, for the thread." He paused. "It is still there in case you did not know, thin but there." The god of consuming fire was very still for a moment. His burning white eyes looked at Sail with an expression that was entirely unreadable. Then he looked back at the pool. "She asked me once," Ashar said quietly, "if my fire could be something other than consuming. I said no. I said fire takes and does not return, that is the nature of fire." A long pause. "I have thought about that conversation for a very long time." "You were wrong." "Yes," Ashar was quiet. "The pool proves it. The pool has always proven it. I have been keeping the heart of fire closed, have been stopping Thessaly's people, stopping this work, and the pool was here all along." He paused. "The fire before consuming, the original fire. I kept it from her because I was afraid it would take her." He looked back at Sail. "But the fear has been taking her just as surely, just more slowly." Sail said nothing. He simply sat with the god in the warmth of the heart and watched the pool breathe and said nothing. "She trusts you," Ashar said at last. This was not a compliment and not a warning. It was simply a fact, stated with the directness of a being who had been fire for a very long time and had no use for indirection. "She has not trusted anyone in a very long time." I know. Don't fail her. I will not. Another silence. Then Ashar made a sound that was not quite a laugh, a short, rough sound that was more like a fire snapping at a knot in the wood, unexpected, slightly surprised at itself. She said you smelled like bread, he said. Sales smiled despite himself. I do bake bread. Ashar stood, vast and burning and impossible. I will not interfere, he said. With the making, I cannot watch it, I do not think, but I will not interfere. He paused, and for a moment the consuming fire god looked like something much older and much more vulnerable than his power suggested. Bring her back. I will. You cannot know that. No, he agreed. But I can know that I will hold the thread until my hands give out and pass that too. Ashar looked at him for one more long moment. Then he was gone, not fled, not walked away, simply no longer present, the way fire is sometimes no longer present between one blink and the next. The heat of the heart dropped slightly in his absence. The fire structures adjusted incrementally. At the edge of the garden, Kira was watching him with an expression that was all warmth. On the 31st day underground, everything changed. It came through the deep threads, not with sound, not with the assault of something attacking, but with the quality Sale had been learning to recognize since the passes in the mountains. The seeping, patient, inexorable cold of the void, moving into the warm places. He felt it first as a drop in temperature that was nothing to do with the heart's own rhythms, a cold beneath the warmth, specific and alien. The way a draft in a warm room is specific, is different from the room. He sat up from sleep and looked at the threads in the dark. The gray was in the heart's deep threads now. Not much, not enough to have reached the pool itself, not enough to have touched the fire structures. But it was there, and it was spreading, and the rate was faster than what he had seen above. Down here, with the world's deep structural threads exposed and vulnerable, the void moved faster. It moved the way infection moves in deep tissue, not visibly dramatic but efficient. He went to the pool and crouched at its edge and looked. The pool was still breathing, still white gold at the center, still the colors of all fire at the edges. But at the outermost rim, where the fire water met the black stone, there was a color that had not been there before, gray, barely present, but there. I see it, Kira said from behind him. She was standing at the garden's edge, arms crossed, not with cold, she could not be cold, but with the posture of someone containing something large. Her hair was lit more brightly than usual, the fire threads running in it agitated, responsive to the disturbance in the deep threads. How long? He said. At this rate, she looked at the pool. The pool is older than anything the void has consumed so far. It will resist longer, but she paused. Weeks, perhaps less. Thessaly, he said. He looked up toward the ceiling he could not see, toward the surface and the plateau and the road through the mountain passes. She'll be feeling this. Everyone will be feeling this. Kira uncrossed her arms and came to crouch beside him at the pool's edge. She put one hand in the fire water, just the tips of her fingers, the way you test a temperature, and her eyes went distant with the feeling of it. It's still whole at the center. The oldest fire, the deepest fire, it's still there. She looked at him. We should not wait. No. There are things I need to, she paused. There are things I need to say before we begin. I need to, she stopped again. He watched her find her way to the words. "Tell me," he said. "I need you to know," she said, "that this is not duty." Her voice was direct and careful in equal measure. "I am not doing this because it is what is needed, though it is what is needed. I am not doing it because Thessaly asked, or because the world requires it, or because my mother would have done it. I am doing it because," she looked at him. "Because 25 days ago I had been alone in the dark for 2 centuries and had almost convinced myself that this was simply what existence felt like for a being like me. And then you came through the back passage covered in rock dust and smelling of the mountain cold, and you sat down beside my pool and asked if you could sit, and since that moment I have not been able to find the loneliness anymore." Her voice was very quiet. "I don't want the world to end. I don't want the gray to take the deep threads and the village full of amber connections and the old dog and the baker and the night-blooming water flowers and the smell of bread in the morning. I don't want any of it to go gray and cold and still." She paused. "But I especially," her voice for the first time wavered. "I especially do not want it to take this. What is here between us? I need you to know that the primary thing is this." He reached over and took her hand, the same hand, still warm from the fire water, the warmth flowing from her fingers into his palm. "I know," he said. "I knew before you said it. The threads. The threads." She looked at their joined hands. "Tell me what it looks like," she said. "The thread between us, tell me exactly." He looked at it. He took a moment to really look, not the quick checking glance he had been giving it for days, but a full, careful looking, the way he looked at old damage in village threads that needed repairing. He looked at the color and the texture and the age of it, and the direction it ran and the warmth in it. "Rose red," he said, "deep rose with fire at the edges. Thicker than it was when I arrived, much thicker. It started as barely a suggestion, and now it is like rope, like a cable, something that has been built strand by strand." He paused. "It is warm at both ends in a way that is different from ordinary warmth, not just connection warmth, but something more specific, more particular." He looked at her. "Like a fire that knows what it is burning for." She squeezed his hand. "Then you will find it," she said. "When I am in the pool and everything else is sorted and the fire is working through me, you will find it and you will hold it, and I will follow it back." "Yes," he said. "No matter what the fire shows you," she said. "It will show you things. It works on the person outside the pool as well as the person inside. It will try to sort you too, in its way. It will find what you fear and make it visible. You must not let go." "I will not let go. Promise me again." "Kira." He turned to face her fully, the pool breathing between them and behind her the fire garden burning in all its colors. "I promise you. I will not let go of the thread between us for anything in the world or outside it. I will hold it until you are back or until I am no longer capable of holding anything. And I am planning to be capable of holding things for a very long time." She looked at him. Then she leaned forward and kissed him, not quickly this time, not the brief threshold crossing of before, but at length, with the warmth of a fire that has found what it wants to be burning for. And he kissed her back with the care and the attention of someone who has spent 26 days learning to see a thing and has no intention of looking away. When they separated, she was smiling. He had not seen her smile before, not quite like this, not this particular expression, which was both fiercer and softer than he had expected, and which reordered something in him permanently. "All right," she said. "All right," he agreed. They spent the next 2 days in preparation. The preparations were not physical. She needed nothing to bring with her into the pool, no tools or talismans or weapons. What she was bringing was herself, the centuries of accumulated fire knowledge, the vocabulary of embers and their meanings, the specific understanding of the pool's nature that came from a lifetime spent beside it. She was bringing the fire in her blood. She was bringing her mother's mortality, carried in her half-divine body, the capacity for ending, the knowledge of fragility, the understanding that things did not have to last forever to matter. And she was bringing the threads. Sales spent the first day reinforcing them, not the thread between himself and Kira specifically, which was as strong as anything he had ever seen, but the threads connecting Kira to the other things she would need to find her way back. The thread between her and the pool itself, the thread between her and the fire garden, the thread between her and Ashar, frayed as it was. He worked carefully and at length, not weaving new connections but attending to the ones that existed, making sure they were visible and warm and viable. She watched him work. He had done this before, had worked on threads in her presence, but always on his own or on the threads between other things. This was the first time he was working on hers directly, and the intimacy of it was different from anything they had yet shared. It was the intimacy of being truly seen, of having one's own connective tissue examined with care, of being found worth the attention. "You're very gentle," she said, on the first day, watching his hands move through the air in the patterns that looked from the outside like nothing, but that she had learned to associate, through his descriptions, with the movement of thread. "Always," he said. "Is it learned or natural?" "Both." He moved through a section of her connection to the fire garden, feeling the way the threads ran old and deep and very slightly more accessible than when he had arrived, as if the 26 days had opened something between her and the ordinary world she had been closed off from. "Merit taught me that the sight has its own requirements. You cannot see the threads if you are not gentle with them. The attention that the sight demands is the same attention that gentleness demands, full presence without agenda." "Your merit sounds extraordinary." "She is." He worked for a moment in silence. "She would like you, I think. She has great respect for things that are more than they appear." Kira smiled at this, that fierce soft smile he had filed away in the permanent storage of himself on the day he first saw it. "I wonder sometimes," she said, "what it would be like, the ordinary world, the village and the bread and the night flowers and the weeping willows." She paused. "After." "After," he said. "When I return." She was very deliberate about when rather than if, and he loved her for it. "When I am whatever I am after, I wonder if it will be possible to," she searched for words. "If the creature of death and return can walk in the valley of Ardenmere and smell bread and look at threads." He stopped working, he looked at her. "I will take you there," he said. "You don't know what I will be." "No," he agreed. "But whatever you are, you will be the thing that saved it, and it will be worth seeing." On the second day, they did not prepare at all. They simply existed, sat in the fire garden and talked and were quiet in turns, the way people who have found ease with each other alternate between filling the air and not needing to. They talked about the small things, her favorite of the fire structures, the branching blue-violet trees, for their grief-made beautiful quality. His favorite bread to bake, a dark rye with honey and dried fruit, the kind that took 2 days to properly ferment. Whether fish were aware of themselves, the aesthetics of storms over water. Small things with the weight of large ones, as small things always have between people for whom the large things are already understood. She told him about her mother. Her name had been Adele. She had been a weaver, not of threads in sales sense, but of actual cloth, an extraordinary weaver of cloth, known in her village for textiles that people said seemed to carry warmth in them beyond what the material accounted for. Adele had come to the sacred fire on a midsummer night with an offering of cloth, a piece she had spent months making, the most beautiful thing she had ever made, which she was giving away, which was the point, which was the nature of the offering. She had approached the fire more closely than anyone should have, and she had not been destroyed. She had been changed. She had stood in the consuming fire and it had not consumed her. It had recognized, perhaps, the quality of making in her, the dedication and the love woven into the cloth she carried, and it had responded not with destruction but with something unprecedented, with the fire of recognition, with the fire that says, "I see you," with the fire that gives rather than takes. Ashar had found her afterward, had found her changed and extraordinary and entirely herself, and been. "My mother always said," Kira told him, her voice soft, "that she was not frightened of the fire. That night at the sacred place, she was not frightened. She paused. She said it felt like being understood, completely without qualification, without the need to explain anything. She said the fire knew her the same way she knew her own cloth, strand by strand, thread by thread, the whole pattern visible." She looked at the pool. She said that, when the fire touched her, it felt like coming home to a place she had never been before. Sale listened to this and thought about the pool, thought about what it would feel like being sorted, separated, held apart. Thought about the thread between himself and Kira, the cable of rose-red warmth that he would be holding in his hands. "Your mother gave you that," he said. "That quality of the fire, the recognition fire, the seeing fire." He paused. "That is what she is bringing into the pool with her, not just mortality. The specific kind of mortality that is your mother's legacy, the kind that can stand in consuming fire and be changed rather than destroyed because the quality of its love is too visible to burn." Kira was very still for a moment. Then she said, quietly, "I had never thought of it that way. Your father taught you fire as taking, but you were made from fire as giving." He looked at her. "You are already the thing being made. You are going into the pool to become your own truest nature." She looked at him for a long time. Something settled in her expression, something large and final and peaceful. "I am ready," she said. On the 29th day underground, as the gray crept further into the deep threads and the pool's outermost ring went a little more cold, and the fire structures nearest the heart's walls flickered with an uncertainty they had not shown before, they stood at the pool's edge, and Sale took the thread between them in his hands. He could feel it physically. This was unusual, even for someone with his depth of sight. He could usually see threads, could touch them sometimes when they were very strong, but to hold one was rare. The thread between himself and Kira was strong enough to hold. He took it between both hands, the rose-red cable of it, warm and specific and burning at the edges, and he felt the whole history of it in his palms. The first day, thin as suggestion, the growing, the 17 days of talking, the kiss, the storm of the previous few days with the void coming, all of it held. She stood at the edge of the pool and looked at him. She was wearing nothing of cloth. She had shed the deep red clothing of banked coals, had put it aside with the deliberateness of someone who understands that you do not go into the oldest fire in the world wearing anything borrowed, anything symbolic, anything that was not essentially yours. She wore only herself, the fire-threaded hair loose, the white gold eyes clear, the warmth of her own making radiating without apology. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He was not thinking it as compliment. He was thinking it as the plain truth, the way you acknowledge a fact of the world, the way you acknowledge that the sky is large or the sea is deep or that loss is real. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen because she was everything simultaneously. Ancient and young, divine and mortal, fire and the memory of fire, the consuming and the giving and the thing between them that did not yet have a name. She was standing on the edge of the oldest fire in the world, preparing to give herself entirely to the making of something that would save what they both loved, and she was not afraid. She looked at him and he thought, I will hold this in the back of my mind for the rest of my life. The exact quality of the light, the exact color of her eyes, the way she stood. Hold on, she said. I will not let go, he said, for the third time. For the last time it would need to be said that way. The way a thing that needs saying 3 times to be real is said 3 times and then needs no further confirmation. She stepped into the pool. What happened when Kira entered the pool was not visible in the ordinary sense. There was no explosion, no dramatic transformation, no visible conflagration. She stepped in, and the fire water accepted her opened around her feet like water, like silk, like something that had been waiting, and she went deeper, one step at a time, with the steady, deliberate rhythm of someone walking toward something they have decided to walk toward. The pool rose around her, and the world changed. Not dramatically, not all at once, but the threads. Sale felt it first in the thread he was holding, a tremendous surge of warmth, a sudden intensification of the rose-red color until it was nearly white at the center, nearly the white of the pool's deepest heart. The thread in his hands became more itself, more real. He tightened his grip. Then the pool itself began to change. The breathing rhythm accelerated not to the speed of panic, but to the speed of something alive and working, the speed of a heart in exertion. The light from the pool brightened, from amber to gold to something approaching white. The fire structures in the garden responded, the blue-violet trees brightened, the white pillars sharpened, the green-copper light intensified. The whole heart was responding to what was happening in the pool, the way a body's circulatory system responds to an event at the body's center. And the gray stopped. He could see it in the deep threads, could feel it, through the thread in his hands, the gray that had been creeping into the heart's structural connections. It stopped. It did not reverse, not immediately, but it stopped, encountered something in the brightened pulse of the pool that it could not process, could not absorb, could not turn cold. The void had never encountered anything it couldn't eventually consume. And here was something it couldn't consume, and it stopped, uncertain at the edge of its own method. Kira had gone below the surface of the pool. Sale held the thread. Then the fire showed him what it was afraid he would let go over. It was subtle. It was not a vision exactly, not a scene projected on the air. It was more like a shift in the quality of what he felt through the thread, a shift in the temperature of it, a cold note creeping in at the edges of the warm. And through the cold came the shape of his fear. He saw or felt or understood the thread going still. The thread going still and cold, the rose-red color draining from it, the fire at its edges going out. He felt the specific quality of a thread when it breaks. He had felt it twice before, with old connections in the village, and it was unmistakable, the specific small asterisk cessation of it, the way a sound you had stopped noticing makes itself known by going absent. He felt the thread preparing to do that. And the fire that was working on Kira in the pool, sorting her, taking her apart element by element with ancient and absolute patience. The fire was also working on him. It was finding the thing he feared and making a shape of it, testing the quality of his holding, determining whether he was the material the work required. He held on. He held on not by force, not by the clenching of will, not by the white-knuckled determination of someone who refuses to acknowledge that things can break. He held on by attending, by looking at the thread and seeing it clearly, its history, its substance, its warmth that was even now being tested but was not going cold. He held on by remembering the 29 days. By holding in his mind the specific quality of her laugh on the 7th day when he had described the night-blooming flowers, and she had said, with genuine delight * possibility, "That is exactly right. I know that smell *." By holding the way she had leaned her head on his shoulder in the fire garden, long and warm, the warmth of something returning from a great distance. By holding the fierce soft smile. By holding everything. The fire tested him and found him not invulnerable, not fearless, not beyond the reach of what he loved being threatened. It found him entirely afraid, and it found him holding anyway. And the cold note ceased. The thread in his hands went back to rose red, back to warm, back to burning at the edges with the specific fire of a connection that had been built, strand by strand, over 29 days and all the accumulated human time before them. He stood at the edge of the pool and held on, and the pool blazed, and in the deep threads of the world the gray faltered. How long she was in the pool he could not have said. The heart's light cycle had gone strange, the normal rhythm disrupted by the intensity of what was happening in the pool, the light blazing constant at the highest register, the distinction between cycle phases dissolved in the brightness. He held the thread. He could feel her through it, not her thoughts, not specifically, but her state. The way you can feel, through a thread, not the content of what someone is experiencing, but the quality of it. He searched for the right description. She was working. She was in the fire and working, with the same concentrated, deliberate energy she had brought to everything, to every conversation and decision and preparation. She was not being passive, not simply enduring what the fire was doing to her. She was collaborating with it. She was giving it what it needed and asking it for what she needed, and the negotiation was complex and long, and he could feel, through the thread, that it was going the right direction. He could feel her mother in her, the weaver, the woman who had stood in consuming fire and been understood. He could feel that quality of Adele's moving through Kira like a thread through cloth, the quality of love that does not flinch from fire. He thought about Thessaly, somewhere above. He thought about the 40 days of road and the ruined temple of the river god, and the cool water smell of the night-blooming flowers, and the willows weeping for reasons no one had explained. He thought about Merritt and her old patient voice, and the way she had held his hands in the cold of the smithy's yard, and told him that fear was a thread, that fear was the connection to what you valued. He thought about Ardenmere going gray. He thought about all of it going gray, Every amber thread and gold-warm connection, every small love and large grief, every bread and hive and weeping willow and thread between old friends. He thought about the void's patience, its total, absolute, impersonal patience, the patience of forgetting. He tightened his grip. He said, aloud into the blazing light of the heart, "Come back." Not as command, not as plea exactly, as invitation, as information, as the completion of the loop, the signal the thread was designed to carry. Here is where I am, here is the warmth, here is the specific light of the connection we built in 29 days, here is what you follow. "Come back," he said again. "The world is waiting, I am waiting." His voice was steady and warm, and everything he meant was in it. "Come home, you said you'd never been, come home." The pool blazed. Afterwards, he would not have adequate words for what happened next. He would try many times in many contexts. He would tell it to Thessaly, who would listen with her silver eyes very bright. He would tell it to Merit, who would say, "Yes, I thought it would be something like that." He would tell it eventually to people who came to ask, because people did come to ask after, because the making of the Phoenix was not a private event but a world event, registered in every deep thread and felt, however they chose to interpret it, by everyone living. And he would always find himself reaching for the same inadequate language. The closest he ever came was this. Imagine that you are holding, in your hands, a thread. And the thread is everything, is every warm connection you have ever known, is the totality of all the warmth the world has ever generated, concentrated in a single strand of rose-red warmth with fire at its edges. And then imagine that the thread, instead of staying thread, decides to become what it has always been describing, decides to stop pointing at the thing and become the thing. Imagine that fire does that. Imagine that love does that. What rose from the pool was not Kira, not exactly. Not the Kira who had stood in the fire garden for 2 centuries keeping the pool company. That Kira was in this, was the foundation, the essential core, the fire and the waiting and the centuries of accumulation. But what came out of the pool had been remade at the level of the possible. What came out of the pool was wings. First, wings. Vast and extraordinary, and every color that fire had ever been, burning from tip to tip with the kind of light that did not hurt to look at, but changed the quality of what could be seen in its presence. Not feathers exactly, or feathers that were also flames, or flames that had learned the language of feathers, or some third thing that both were approximations of. They rose from the pool's surface before anything else, cutting the bright air of the heart in 2 arcs of absolute, incandescent beauty. And then her. She rose on the wings, from the pool that had taken her apart and given her back in a new language. She was herself. He could see it in the thread, the rose-red thread that was still there, still burning, that had gone from rope to something more fundamental, was now less a thread between 2 things, and more the ground the 2 things stood on. She was Kira, and she was also everything the pool had made of her. She was larger than she had been, she was brighter, she was fire in the shape of a woman, or a woman in the shape of fire. Or some third thing, neither woman nor fire, but both entirely, the way some words mean both a thing and its action, both the noun and the verb. Her hair was gone, or was the wings, or had become the same thing as the wings. Her eyes, when they opened and found him, were the color of the pool's center, white gold, clear, with a depth that had more in it now than 2 centuries of accumulated waiting. She floated above the pool, wings wide, blazing. She looked at him, and then she smiled. The fierce, soft smile, exactly as he had filed it away, exactly as he had been holding it in the back of his mind for the duration. The smile that was both fiercer and softer than expected, that reordered something in him permanently, that he had not, after all, been wrong to memorize. He exhaled. He had not realized fully that he had been holding his breath. She descended, the wings folding slowly, not disappearing, not going away, but settling, becoming something that could coexist with the ordinary scale of the space. She touched down on the black stone of the heart with bare feet, and the stone was warm where she touched it, and she was warm when she walked to him, and she was Kira. She took his face between her hands. "You held on," she said. "I said I would." Her eyes, up close, were extraordinary deeper than they had been, as if the pool had added rooms to them, as if the sight could have seen all the way through her now and come out somewhere else entirely. But they were also warm, also entirely specific, also his. "I followed the thread back," she said, "exactly as you described, rose-red fire at the edges." She paused. "I could feel everything you were holding, all of it, the 29 days, the bread, the night flowers, the willows." Her voice was quiet. "I followed the bread home." He laughed. It was a short, rough, overwhelmed sound, the kind of laugh that is close enough to crying to be both. She put her arms around him. She was warm. She was extraordinarily, perfectly warm, the warmth of the oldest fire that had ever been, the warmth of something that had been to the bottom of itself and come back. She was warm, and she was there, and the thread between them was no longer rose-red, but something that did not have a color, or was all colors, or was the kind of light that exists before colors are different things. He held her. The pool breathed behind them, slower now, satisfied, returning to its ancient rhythm. The fire garden burned in all its colors. Somewhere above them the gray had stopped its spreading. He could feel it in the deep threads, the cessation, the reversal beginning, slow and enormous and very, very real. In the deep threads of the world, something had changed. Thessaly had been waiting on the first ash plateau. She had been there for 33 days, since she had sent sail into the crack in the world. She had sat on the glass-smooth stone in all weathers, and the eastern mountain range had a great deal of weather with her gray wool and her silver eyes and the ash-colored threads running off her in every direction. She had been watching the deep threads. She had felt the gray falter. She had felt the pool blaze. She had felt, through the deep structural threads of the world that were her oldest connections, the precise moment when something unprecedented had occurred. She had wept. Thessaly, goddess of memory and grief, keeper of endings, had sat on the glass-smooth stone of the first ash plateau and wept, and the threads running off her had shifted, for the first time in many thousands of years, from the color of ash to something warmer. When they came up through the crack in the world, sail first, tired and stone-dusted and blinking in the mountain light, and then Kira, who came through the crack as if it were a doorway she had used 1,000 times, Thessaly rose from the stone and stood very still, watching. Kira looked at her. Thessaly looked at Kira. The phoenix spread her wings, half opening them in the cold mountain air, testing the new element, the open sky, the cold and the light and the enormous space of the world above the world. The wings caught the light in a way that was not reflective but generative. They didn't just show the light, they added to it, made it more, brightened the air of the plateau. "Thessaly," Kira said. "Kira," the goddess said, her voice was very quiet. "You are." "Yes." Kira looked at the goddess steadily, without the distance or the caution that 2 centuries of separation might have built. "I know what you tried to tell me through him. I want you to know," she paused. "I know you were watching. I believe it had a purpose. And the waiting was," she stopped, looked at Sail briefly. "The waiting was exactly as long as it needed to be." Thessaly's ancient, silver face did something complicated and beautiful. She crossed the glass-smooth stone and took Kira's hands in her own, the fire of the phoenix and the ash of the goddess of grief, held palm to palm, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Then Thessaly turned to Sail. She looked at him with eyes that held 10,000 years of accumulated knowing, and in them he saw something new, not just knowledge, not just grief. Relief. Pure, simple, enormous relief. "You kept your promise," she said. "Yes." "I wasn't entirely certain you would." A pause. Not because of any doubt in you specifically, because she looked at the plateau, at the glass stone and the distant peaks and the cold, clear sky of the high places. Because I have been hopping for this for so long that I had developed the superstition that hope itself was a jinx, that wanting it too much would prevent it. She looked back at him. "I was wrong." "You usually are," Kira said from behind her, and there was something in her voice that was warmth and old familiarity, and the slight edge of someone working through a complicated feeling. And Thessaly turned, and they were looking at each other with the complicated warmth of 2 people who have loved each other badly for a long time and are beginning, slowly, the process of loving each other better. Sail stood on the glass stone and looked out at the mountains and felt, for the first time in 33 days underground, the wind. It was extraordinary. It was cold and clean and smelled of stone and altitude and the thin blue sky of very high places, and he had never, in all his life, been more grateful for a simple physical sensation. He felt it against his face, and he breathed it in and he thought, "I am alive, and the world is alive, and the gray is stopping, and Kira is standing 20 feet away, and she is the most extraordinary thing that has ever existed." The wind moved through Kira's wings. The wings caught it, turned it, played with it, let it pass through them in a way that changed its quality. The wind that came out the other side of her wings smelled different, warmer, more alive, carrying something of the oldest fire in the way music carries the feeling of the musician. The wind that moved through the first phoenix brought a warmth with it that the mountains had not felt before. It moved outward. It moved across the plateau and over the edge and down into the world below. And in the valley far below, in all the valleys, in all the places where threads had gone gray and cold, the first phoenix's warmth arrived. The reversal was not instantaneous. Nothing that the void had taken over long years could be recovered in an afternoon. The gray threads in the world did not suddenly bloom back into amber and gold. The villages that had lost their warmth did not immediately find it again. The river god's temple remained ruined. The gods who had faded did not return. But the spreading stopped. It stopped completely and immediately, the way a frost stops when the temperature rises, not revering yet but no longer advancing. The gray held where it was, and the quality of the existing threads, the ones that had not yet gone cold changed, brightened, strengthened, as if the world's connective tissue had received something it had been depleted of, some essential element that had been running low. And slowly, the reversal began. Sale could see it walking back down from the first ash plateau, on the road back through the mountain passes, could see it in the threads around him. The passes, which had been cold with the void's cold on the way east, were warmer. Not fully restored, the warmth had a long way to go, but measurably, visibly warmer. The quality of the light through them was different. Kira walked beside him. She had folded the wings against herself, could do this, as she could do many things she was still discovering, with an ease that suggested the phoenix nature had its own intelligence, its own way of knowing what was needed. Folded, the wings were present but not overwhelming, visible as a shimmer along her back, as a warmth that radiated from her, as the fire in her hair that was now more elaborate, more expressive, varying with her emotions the way a face varies. When she was amused, the fire threads went gold and quick. When she was thoughtful, they steadied to deep amber. When she looked at him, they went the specific rose-red color he recognized. He had told her about the night-blooming water flowers on the descent. "I want to see them," she had said immediately. "The ones that smell like possibility. They bloom only at night." "Then we will be there at night." She had said it with the certainty of someone who had waited 2 centuries for things and had decided she was done with waiting. "We will time our arrival." "We will time our arrival," he agreed. Thessaly walked with them for the first 3 days of the descent, until the pass that branched west toward her own territory, the territory of memory and grief, which was everywhere and nowhere, but had its concentrations in certain ancient places of mourning. She walked with them and was different from the Thessaly who had appeared in his kitchen on a Tuesday evening in autumn. Less silver, less ash, something warmer beginning to come through in her color, as if the relief had loosened something long held. On the morning she was to diverge from their path, she stopped at the pass junction and turned. She looked at Kira for a long time. Kira looked back. "There are things I owe you," Thessaly said. "An accounting of all the years, an explanation of the choices I made, I know that." She paused. "I am not asking for forgiveness. I am asking," she stopped, tried again. "I am asking for the chance to begin." Kira was quiet for a moment. "I know what you did," she said at last. "I was in the pool. The pool shows you everything, the threads, the whole history, what was chosen and why." She paused. "You chose to wait rather than risk me with someone who wasn't ready. You chose to keep hopping rather than forcing a making that would have failed." Her voice was careful and honest and without performance. "It cost me, I know it cost me." A beat. "It may also have saved me." She looked at Thessaly steadily. "I would not have been ready before him." Thessaly closed her eyes, opened them. The silver of them was very bright. "Come and find me," she said, "when you are ready, when the world has had a chance to breathe again." A pause. "I have stories of your mother, of the first years, of things you don't know yet." She paused. "I have been keeping them for you." Kira nodded. "I will come," she said. "I promise." They stood for a moment at the pass junction. The mortal man with the sight and the first phoenix, and the goddess of memory and grief, at the place where roads diverged. And then Thessaly turned west and walked into the cold air of the high place and was, presently, gone. Sale and Kira stood at the junction. "East," he said. "East," she agreed. They arrived in Ardenmere on a night in late autumn, when the first frost was on the dark soil, and the willows had lost their leaves and stood bare beside the stream, their particular sorrow made more visible by the absence of concealment. They arrived after midnight, which was exactly right, because the night-blooming water flowers were open, their pale cups turned up toward the dark sky, the cold water scent of them rising in the still air. Sail stopped at the valley's edge and stood for a moment and simply looked. The threads were good. Not perfect, the gray had thinned them. Months of the void's work could not be reversed overnight. The recovery was going to be a long project. But they were warm. The connections between the village's people were amber and gold in the dark, visible even at this distance. The thread between the village and the stream was blue-silver and strong. The thread between the old dog, who was, apparently, still alive, ancient and warm, and the boy who fed him was precisely the amber he remembered. "Oh," Kira said beside him, not a word exactly, a sound. He looked at her. She was looking at the valley with an expression he had not seen before, something that was not quite wonder, not quite grief, not quite the feeling of arriving somewhere you have never been, but somehow recognized. Something that was all three simultaneously, compressed into a single expression that the fire in her hair translated to deep amber and rose. "Tell me what you see," he said. She described it the way he had taught her, not the visual surface, but the fire reading beneath it, the vocabulary of embers and their meanings, the language of temperatures. The village is amber in the oldest sense, amber like the fire that has been burning long enough to know it will keep burning. The stream is blue-silver, the blue of transformation, of water and air meeting, the silver of memory. She paused. The old dog, he's gold at the center, warm and old. And the thread between him and the boy, she paused. It's amber too, old amber, like something that has been warm for so long the warmth has become its nature rather than its current state. "Yes," he said, "that's exactly right." She turned to look at him. The fire in her hair flared briefly, the way it did when something important occurred to her. "Do you know what's strange?" "Tell me." "I have been reading fire for 2 centuries. The same fire, the same heart, the same vocabulary." She looked back at the valley. "And I came out of the pool, and the first thing I could do that I could not do before, the very first, was read the threads in your language. I can see both now, fire and threads simultaneously." Her voice was quiet. "The pool gave me both." "The making," he said. "The making," she paused. "Both languages, the fire language my father taught me and the thread language I learned from you, and they are," she searched for the right word. "They are the same thing. I was right. We were reading the same world in different languages." He thought about this. He thought about the thread between himself and Kira, what it looked like to him, rose-red with fire at its edges. He thought about what fire with rose-red light at its edges would mean in her vocabulary. "What does rose-red fire mean?" he asked. She looked at him. The fire in her hair went rose-red. "Coming home," she said. "In the vocabulary of fire, rose-red is the color of coming home to something you did not know you had been looking for." Silence, the frost on the dark soil, the bare willows, the night flowers open in the cold. "Possibility," he said. "In the vocabulary of threads, the warmth between us smells like the night flowers, like possibility." "Home and possibility," she said. "The same thing," he said, "in different languages." She looked at him, and the fire in her hair was everything rose and gold, and the deep amber of old warmth, and the white of understanding, and the blue-violet of grief made beautiful every color of fire, simultaneously. And at the center of all of them, the clear white gold of the pool, the fire before consuming, the fire that gives. "Take me to smell the flowers," she said. They walked down into the valley, and the willows registered their passing with a slight stiffening. Not alarm, just the alertness of things that have been paying attention for a long time when something comes through that is worth paying attention to. The night-blooming water flowers were open all along the valley's edge, pale and cold water scented. Kira crouched among them and put her face close and breathed in. "Oh," she said, again the not-quite word. Then, "Yes, exactly that." She looked up at him with white gold eyes, standing in the cold of a late autumn night surrounded by night flowers while the frost settled around them and the phoenix warmth kept the cold from biting. "Everything you had not yet imagined, everything about to happen." "Including this," he said. She stood slowly and looked at him in the dark with the fire in her hair warm and the wings folded against her, and the whole night around them, and the valley lit faintly by the moon and faintly by her. "Including this," she agreed. He took her hand. She was warm. She was always warm. She was the oldest fire that had ever been, given back to the world in the shape of something that could die and return, that could carry warmth through the deepest dark and emerge with it intact. She was the first phoenix, the first of her kind, and she was standing in the valley of Ardenmere among the night-blooming water flowers that smelled like possibility, and she was holding his hand. In the deep threads of the world, far below them, the gray was retreating. Slowly, incrementally, the way warmth returns, not all at once, not dramatically, but with the absolute patience of something that knows it is going in the right direction. The deep structural threads of the world were brightening, the connections between one fundamental thing and another reestablishing themselves, the threads between fire and memory, between past and future, between the thing that ends and the thing that returns. Somewhere in the territory of memory and grief, Thessaly was sorting through her stores the accumulated keepings of 10,000 years and beginning, slowly, to share them back. To return to the world what the world had forgotten. To counter forgetting with remembering, ending with returning. And at the heart of fire, Ashar sat beside the pool that had given back what it had taken, the pool that was full now of something it had not held before. The echo of his daughter, the warmth of her passing through it, the rose-red fire-water mark of a love that had been formed in its light and returned through it and left something of itself behind. He sat beside the pool, and he looked at it for a very long time. And then, very slowly, the god of the consuming flame put his hand in the fire-water and left it there. The story of the first phoenix was told for a very long time after that night, and it was never told quite the same way twice, which is how you know a story has become true. Not true in the way that records are true, not true in the way that only one version can be true, but true in the deeper sense, the sense that matters. True because it describes something real about the shape of the world and the nature of what holds it together. The phoenix herself was seen in many places over many years. She was seen over dying villages, where her passing left warmth in the threads and a brightening in the quality of connection between people who had been slowly going gray. She was seen over flooded rivers, where her fire did not consume the water, but something stranger warmed it at the molecular level, gave it the quality of water that remembered being a river rather than merely flooding. She was seen over ruins and temples and grave fields and all the places where things had ended. And everywhere she was seen, the threads brightened and the gray retreated, and the quality of the world's connective tissue improved, incrementally, in the way that things improve when attended to by something that understands them. She was seen less often, but seen nonetheless, in a small valley with dark, fertile soil and weeping willows, in the company of a man with warm brown skin and dark, patient eyes, and the kind of hands that moved through the air in patterns that looked like nothing but were, to those who knew how to look, the handling of something very precious. She was seen there in the early morning, when the bread was in the oven and the hives were waking. She was seen there in the evening, when the light went gold and the stream caught it, and the willows stopped pretending not to feel things. She was seen there in the deep night, when the night-blooming water flowers opened, and the air was cold and clean and smelling of something not yet named. And if you watched carefully, you would see the two of them crouch among the flowers and breathe and look at each other. And in that look, which was the look of two people who had found the same truth in different languages and knew it, who had held on through the fire and come back with something permanent, in that look was the whole of it, the fire and the thread, the consuming and the giving, the grief and the memory, the ending and the return. Every phoenix after her carried it. The ones who came later, the ones who rose from the wings of the first and went out into the world with their own fires and their own returnings. Every one of them carried in their light the specific color of that look, that specific rose-red warmth that meant asterisk coming home to something you did not know you had been looking for. It was the oldest fire, the fire before consuming, the fire that gives. And it was never, not in all the long years after that night on the first ash plateau and all the longer years after that, ever put out. The world breathes. Fire does not only take, it gives. Death is not only ending, it returns. And some loves are not a thread, but the ground the thread stands on, permanent below everything, holding. Note from the historians of the age of reconnection, who came later and tried to set down in orderly chronicle what had happened in the age of the first phoenix, were always frustrated by the story's insistence on being a love story. They wanted it to be an origin myth. They wanted it to be an explanation of natural forces, a cosmological account of why fire does not only consume, a theological text about the nature of the gods. They wanted the phoenix to be a symbol. They were, in the way of historians, missing the point. The phoenix was not a symbol. She was a specific woman who had waited in the dark for a very long time, who had learned the language of fire from her father and the language of longing from her mother, who had kept a pool company for 2 centuries and been found by a mortal man with patient hands and the sight, and who had gone into the oldest fire in the world and come back as something new because she had something to come back for. Symbols do not have something to come back for. People do. The world was saved not by power or strategy or the right convergence of divine forces, though all of these were present. It was saved by a woman who chose to burn completely and a man who held the thread, by a goddess who had been keeping grief for 10,000 years and finally had something to do with it, by a god of consuming fire who put his hand in the giving fire and left it there, by the ordinary, extraordinary, irreducible fact of people who loved something enough to stay present with it through the dark. This is what the phoenix remembers, in each burning and each returning. This is what the phoenix carries, in each flight over the gray places, in each passing that leaves warmth in its wake. This is what she was made of, not only fire, not only memory. The specific warmth of one person mattering to another, the smell of bread in the morning, the amber thread between an old dog and a boy, the willows weeping for reasons nobody had bothered to explain, because they didn't need explanation, because some grief is simply the price of loving something that will end. The night flowers, open in the cold, smelling of everything not yet happened. Possibility. Home,